All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm switching up the format a little bit tonight. This video was actually prompted by a lot of my patrons. Not knowing, of course, you were going to get the lovely Allison in the video. This is something kind of on the fly that I decided to incorporate her with because as I've already done, as we're live streaming right now on Theta, YouTube, DLive, Twitch, and Float, we are also live streaming to her YouTube channel. She also has a YouTube channel where she's started to, over the last couple of years, post some yoga videos and some of her own teachings, and she's going to expand that a little bit moving forward. So if you want to follow one of the links that's posted there, if you're catching it on the video on demand archive on YouTube or Theta or something after the fact, I will make sure that her YouTube channel's in the description line as well, so you can follow her. But what are you going to do? You're going to be doing yoga and what else over the course of the next few months on your channel?
On my channel, I'm going to be talking more about health and wellness things. So my whole approach is a holistic approach to tackling health and wellness. So thinking about setting up important routines, doing some lessons. I'll kind of do an intro lesson here today, but some more lessons on critical thinking. And more yoga and lots of good stuff ahead.
I will definitely be, how do I say, incorporating her more into what I'm doing as well, like doing these types of formats of things, especially if people end up liking it. So anyway, what prompted the video in the first place, like I said, was my patrons. I was getting a lot of new interest, let's just call it, with the V Steganography and the V Cipher knowledge, and the community is growing. But there are actually a lot of females, in fact, that are coming to it, and they're telling me kind of the same thing. There's a lot of intuitive truth that they're getting from my work, but they don't quite understand it to a certain degree that the more detail-oriented kind of male mind does, where it's. And so I brought in my counterpart who can hopefully, along the way with this, explain some of these concepts a little bit softer than I usually do, in a way that maybe makes more sense to the person that's just coming to my work and approaching it, because it's actually a lot more rooted in ancient metaphysics than most people realize, which of course I think you've learned with the V Steganography stuff thus far. But also there are starting points that I can recommend, and that's where the book recommendations later are going to come in, which people have been asking about as well with in regard to my work. But hopefully, again, we're going to have a little bit better emphasis on some better ways that females can approach my work, because it's common feedback I keep getting from those that are joining my channel. So anyhow, that's kind of one of the impetus I had for her joining today. But one of the other things, aside from promoting her YouTube efforts, which we've kind of already talked about, is Allison and I, during the day, you guys might wonder sometimes why I don't post nearly as much as some other creators do. It's because, I think I've mentioned I'm doing production work, and I'm basically a production director for another media outfit that's starting up, that you'll learn more about as time goes on, as we get closer with realizing all those things. But we also, Allison and I, we mentor teens, which she kind of runs point. But we've created an organization together called Kiyotsugi, which maybe you can speak to a little bit, the concept on, and why we've created that, and then I'll share as to kind of why this is a good place for us to start, even with our discussion tonight.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Allison, and like Ben just shared, we're both working on an effort to create an organization. We've started, mentoring teens based on a couple of Japanese concepts. So Kiyotsugi is the program name that I came up with, and it's based off of the first Japanese concept is kintsugi. So kintsugi is actually the process of breaking, a lot of times, pottery, And when things fall apart, instead of throwing them away like we're used to here in our American culture, it's putting it back together, more whole and more beautiful than it was when it before it broke. And a lot of times they'll put it back together with gold. So with specks of gold, building back up. So that leads into the second Japanese concept that it's based off of, which is kiatsu. And kiatsu is unification of the mind, body, and spirit. So with my program, thinking about breaking yourself down, making yourself vulnerable to be aware of maybe shadow work that you have to do, recognizing your flaws and your weaknesses instead of just pushing them aside, bringing them forward so that you can strengthen yourself.
That's right.
And bring yourself back together.
And if you guys notice, a lot of the language she's using, the shadow work she's doing, that's the Wetico-virus we talk so much about on my channel, especially on the Patreon side, from the people that have been looking to go deeper. But
so that's Carl Jung. That actually
Carl Jung's concept
is working with the shadow and doing shadow work. So that's where those terms are coming from. Which
is, of course, what we've referenced as well when we've been talking about the Wetico-virus and the manifestation of it. But the Kintsugi bowl, the first concept in the Kiatsugi framework, as I'm showing you guys here on the screen, you can see the gold cracks that Allison's talked about filling in. I have talked about this concept a couple times on the channel before, but this is a good concept for V-Steganography and the Cipher and history and mystery, the current war, all the memes that we discuss on the Skullcap Savant channels, because it requires the framework of the mind to be broken and then built back better than it was. And that's what the gold signifies. It might not be as functional as a bowl, as an eating device anymore, but it's functional as a receiving device, almost for the intuition or the meditation that came with it, which is beautiful because that's because of the symbolism of what the cup and the goddess energy all represents. And of course, we're talking all about the Venus goddess energy that the Templars are attempting to bring out, all with the V-Steganography. No better representation of that actually than Allison. She's pretty good purveyor of what I might just refer to as the ancient ways that we're trying to bring back. So that's kind of what we're doing during the day. Is we have teenagers coming to our house. They're of course doing their regular schoolwork during the COVID period, but we're running a mentorship campaign or a crusade rather to get their critical thought awoken, and everything we're going to talk about tonight, about everything we discuss on the channel, it factors in here. So if you think this is unrelated, you'll see why it is all related and why I chose to bring it.
Well, it's all about empowerment. Yeah. And we can all use some more empowerment and confidence and knowledge, to make ourselves the best version that we can be. So a lot of the concepts that I'm employing with the teens, it's readily available for everyone. Like everyone can always benefit from working on yourself, looking at your weaknesses and building yourself up to be a more strong and confident individual.
Exactly.
So it's definitely relatable for everyone.
Which is kind of the first concept we've got up here. We got the Merkaba up here. I've pre-drawn a couple things on the whiteboard that we'll be referencing. If you guys can see, you've got the pretty classical lambda, the green lambda, and the red V, which are the two steganography glyphs that I reference most often on the channel. And I got the 36 degrees demarcation down here. And then I've also drawn the Merkaba shape, where also tie these graphics together in relation to what we have also talked about so often, where the Merkaba shape is a resonant structure that matches that with the Earth, the 19.5 degree angles of the latitude lines. If you were to put this thing into a sphere, this is, by the way, where Hawaii is. That's why Hawaii is at 19.5. And we got somebody on Theta, new to Theta from YouTube. Love your content. Your work is incredible, important to keep up the hustle. Thanks. Thanks, Ghostly88. That's very good praise. Thank you. And please follow Allison's work. I put her link into the chat. Here, I'll give it to you again there on Theta. But she's going to be doing a lot more stuff related to some of that shadow work and the how to bring it out. She's going to be sharing in the future a lot of the methodology that we're talking about when we're going to be referencing these shapes throughout the night. And we're just going to see where this goes. Also at the top, as you can recall from some of the earlier work I've done, the Merkaba energy represents love, but the opposite of that is fear. And so I put the quote from Dune up there: "Fear is the mind killer," which is something to keep in mind with the new Dune movie coming out, and which is one of the books I'm going to reference tonight anyway. So it's just kind of a preamble to some of those topics. But let me bring up what I'm talking with you guys about here a little bit more succinctly, because there's a graphic actually that I haven't shown you that lends quite a bit more credence to a lot of these constructs. And I've uploaded these graphics, of course, to my Evernote server for people at least on my $15 Patreon tier. You can find these images we're going to reference in here in the Evernote. But people are pretty familiar, again, with this graphic I've made with the chakra system of the human, the V steganography, the seat of the soul, by which our chitta and our nous, which we're gonna further discuss tonight too, and what those things really represent, and then the lambda, the as above, so below, being congruent, conjugate. There we go. The word I was looking for. Congruent and conjugate in terms of geometry from each other, but only one of them, the materialistic one, is being tuned in to the human race right now. And largely our lambda is not locked in. And this is part of the concept we're going to talk about and why the V steganography matters, because it's the very spell by which the elite sorcerer guys up there are putting these spells into plain sight and controlling the heart frequency, the Merkaba, flipping it with the V, and turning us into a mind of fear rather than love. We've also got, of course, the chakra system represented really nicely right here by the Merkaba again, but the graphic here that's a little bit more complex, but very, very indicative of all the concepts that we go through over on the channel. And if anybody's coming to my work tonight, because you've seen my stuff before, some of this stuff is going to make sense. Others not so much, but this is a really complex graphic. And like I said, it's now in the Evernote, but we do have the Merkaba right here in the middle. And if you notice, this is also kind of the shape of the Solomon, the Hiram Solomon seal, and also the same type of structure as the Freemasons' compass and right angle. So we have a lot of symbolism baked into here, not to mention you've got the Freemasonry pillars of mercy and severity, Yakin and Boaz, which just simply represent the positive and negative energy. Again, if we're going back to the V and the lambda, positive and negative, it's a current. This is kind of a description of the bioelectric current of the human. The ether, where God exists, is where our mind connects with this mechanism that is us. And as you can see, the pentacle locks us into place at the root chakra. The pentacle is locked into place at the root. Our senses, guys, while in our head, this is just a receiver for God or the mind. And we are locked into this density using the Pythagorean pentagram. We've talked about all this 36 degree, 108 degree, 72 degree. This is also a concept of the mind. As you can see, all of the eagle, the Leo, the bull, and the Virgo, these are all of the referential zodiac signs that you find in the wheel card, the 10 wheel card in tarot. And of course, again, right here, we have this locked into place. The mind, the wheel, is locked with the senses, the pentagram, the 5 senses, to create this reality. But it is not actuality. In actuality, where the true nature of spirituality comes from. So we're going to talk a little bit, but here's the cup, like we were discussing in the receiving energy and the giving energy with the dagger. This is the phallic and the vaginal. You have, of course, over on the mercy pillar of mercy, you also have the zodiac signs listed, and then you also have the original 27 letters of the Hebrew alphabet over here in the receiving energy.
Can I point something out really quick too?
Absolutely.
And just looking at all of these different concepts, it's really important to think about balance and why they all exist, why we have this polarity that exists, and how we can use our knowledge of that to create better health and wellness. So like the positive and the negative, if you think about they balance out to be neutral. The receiving cup and the giving energy, you have male and female. So going back to this Merkaba relating to the heart chakra, if you want to go back up to the chakras, there are actually 7 of those. So when you think about the placement of where the heart is literally a funnel. It's in the middle where you have 3 above, 3 below. And so back to the V steganography, which is, I'm not going to speak to it, that's Ben's domain, but back to that balance of as above, so below with the lambda and the V steganography, everything's about balance. So as it goes through your heart, that is the place where you are giving and receiving. And again, just thinking about balance for wellness.
And you guys noticed the 33 very prevalent there, right? The 33 of Freemasonry, again, the connection to Freemasonry is there. 33 is a significant number to Freemasonry because this whole system that we're discussing is represented by the network of our spine, our vagus nerve system, which create our emotions, which allow us to experience life in this way. It all runs up and down our spine. So do the chakras themselves. So this whole network, it runs by a structure of skeletal vertebrae, of which we have 33 in number. So we have 33 vertebrae, therefore. And if you notice the very heart of it, the center, we have 3 above and 3 below. So as above, so below. We'll get into deeper, potentially later on in the night, some symbolism that I can draw up here on the board that further describes the kind of spontaneous energy creation that's happening there at the heart chakra. But it is ultimately up to us, because this is the case, whether or not we tune this thing to fear or to love. And that's kind of the challenge, because if you can realize that this is spontaneously you connected to the mind, you're receiving the intuition and integrating it down here, which broadcasts it like a torus through the rest of your body.
I just wanted to say too, just to comment on that love piece and, coming from a place of love, it's just so important. And so many of us need to remember that today in our culture. But love is the antidote for fear. Love is the antidote for hate, for judgment, for jealousy, for shame. Love cures all. So when you think about truly resonating from that place of your heart, that love is going to conquer. And, specifically as Ben was talking about with the fear, to get rid of that mindset, to better receive the energy. Because again, back to the giving and receiving.
Fear is the mind killer. Like on the graphic we just had up, the mind is what connects us with God. And if you're living in fear, it's killing that connection, is what that whole thing is about. And if you've read the novel of Dune, which I guess is as good a time as any to bring out my first book recommendation for the night, because I told you guys, everybody's been looking at, they've been saying, Ben, where can I start to read about the V steganography? And the answer is there are a bunch of different places you can start, and that's you can start from a fiction perspective. You can read through some fiction, and that's what Dune will show us. Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy will show us. These are a couple of good recommendations from a fictional perspective. If you're that kind of a reader, where you can start to see the mind control of the system that has been painted over the top of us with the pentacle. It's not anything but a sacred shape that Pythagoras showed us, of course, 1 and phi, being fractally significant to scale things. This is why it's important to keep these things in mind from a construct of even architecture. But we've come to this so many times, and this shape up here, when the pentagram is upright, of course, represents the lambda. When you reverse the polarity of this, you get an upside down pentagram representing the V, showing that they're using the glyph against the human mind in a way that's locking us in to the materialism in an unhealthy way. Mind controlling us with the wheel and tricking us into thinking, by the way, that the serpent energy, which I'll go over in a video later this week, is not the divine energy. It's the serpent dragon energy. Remember, I've said so many times, the Kundalini is the rising serpent energy, and when you connect all of your chakras together and reach nirvana through the top, you become the winged dragon. That's what the winged dragon represents. The dragon is not an actual creature. It's a mythological creature based on this concept.
Yeah, and before we get too far ahead with our ideas, I just wanted to go back to that basic level of understanding of, how do you conquer fear? We're saying, oh, well, love is the antidote, or love conquers all. And it's in a more simply put way. And this is something that I have a video on my YouTube channel that goes more in depth that you can watch, but it's all related to the comfort zone. So we have this 4-span framework that helps us better visualize where fear comes from and how to ultimately conquer it. So if you can see my drawing up here, I might have to hang on to this for a second.
Yeah.
It starts in the comfort zone, and we all know what it feels like to be in our comfort zone. That's where we're secure and stable, where things make sense and are predictable. And right outside of that is our fear zone. So when we start to step out of our comfort zone, we get really uncomfortable, and that's where that fear comes from. But right past that, if we keep pushing and we keep pushing ourselves past our limits, then we enter the learning zone, where we learn from the experience, we're out of the fear, and then ultimately extending to that growth zone, which is where we all want to be when we think about maturing and evolving and living our most balanced life. You don't want to be in a place of comfort, and you definitely don't want to exist in a place of fear. And sometimes we have a tendency to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, or circumstances in our life push us outside of that, and then our fear zone becomes what's comfortable. And that's where a lot of us get into those states of depression and anxiety and stress, where we think that's normal. And I'll let you get back to all the Steganography, but I just wanted to share this visual. Like I said, I have a more in-depth video talking about the 4 comfort zone framework on my YouTube channel, so you can check that out. But thinking about extending beyond that fear zone.
I hope that makes sense to everybody. It's and we'll talk about how significant 4 is to that number structure. I'll bring back up with the graphic. Remember the 4 at the feet, the pentacle, and I didn't think I had my streaming screen up actually last time, so I'm going to show the pentagram again to people. This is the pentagram, the lambda right here when it's upright. When the pentagram is reversed, the V is prominent at the bottom. These two structures here, 36 degrees. 36 degrees. 36 degrees is the triangular number for 666, which is where knowledge is housed. Talking about how significant in my Patreon videos lately, how with the megalithic system, how significant 666 is as it relates to also some other figure, 555. Which is all V Steganography. 555 and 666 are synonymous because 55.5 feet equals 666 inches. 555 feet equals 6,660 inches. So you have all these connections with the V Steganography and 555 and 666. This is all just a different way of looking at different Hermetic knowledge that's hidden in plain sight using these glyphs. And as Allison's hopefully pointing out to you guys, there's a little bit more of an intuition piece to this than we often get into on the channel. But anyway, that's kind of where I digress a little bit, and I want to get into actually talking about a couple of different ways in which before we talk to anybody about the other books that they can read, I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of different ancient books, as it were. Let's just call them. They're I'm going to get them pulled up here.
Ancient books and ancient knowledge.
The Trivium and the Quadrivium. Okay. Now, V's at the heart of these two. I don't think there's any steganography in here. There could be, in terms of, I think as everybody's pointed out, or as I pointed out to everyone on my Patreon channel how I believe when V is between two letter I's, it represents the seed of the soul between the very two pillars of Joaquin and Boaz that we're talking about. It's this Kabbalistic structure. So I always see that is the case with the V's between the I's, and the quadrivium and the trivium both have that prominent. So if there is V steganography, which I do actually think it relates, it is in a good way that it is referenced in terms of there's a clue here for you to pick apart in terms of the ancient knowledge.
And just thinking about intuition too, the V between the two eyes. Think about where your third eye chakra is and where your intuition comes from between your two eyes.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good
little bit there. Yeah,
exactly. That's actually a good ad, because I wasn't thinking about that, but that is yes. And again, integrating and balancing the V and the lambda is what will activate that third eye. But because you are an educator, I wanted you to speak for a while on the fact that the trivium and quadrivium concepts are completely lost. You can speak to whatever you'd like, I suppose, but related to Common Core or whatnot. But the trivium and the quadrivium were ancient Gnostic principalities that every child would learn from a very young age. And the trivium was taught first. And as you guys can see here on the screen, it was the lower division of the 7 liberal arts: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So they teach these first: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. The trivium is implicit on the marriage of philology and Mercury. Remember how prominent Mercury and Hermes and the Hermetic knowledge are to our researches. Grammar, logic, and rhetoric were essential to a classic education, as explained in Plato's dialogues. The 3 subjects together were denoted by the word trivium during the Middle Ages, but the tradition of first learning those 3 subjects was established in ancient Greece. Contemporary iterations have taken various forms, including those found in certain British and American universities, some being part of the classical education movement, and at the independent Oundle School in the United Kingdom. So that was what the trivium was. It was the first 3 subjects, completely semantically divorced from what we think those things are today. They thought they were getting taught logic, grammar, and rhetoric in respect to metaphysics in every single category. Then they would graduate, and in the liberal arts education, the quadrivium would consist of the arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Okay? So these were the 4 higher arts, using the basis of grammar, rhetoric, and logic as their foundation. Okay? And so in Latin, it means the 4 ways, and its use for the 4 subjects has been attributed together. The trivium and quadrivium comprise the several liberal arts based on thinking skills. 7 chakras, 7 liberal arts, as distinguished in the practical arts. Okay? So when working together in these ancient Platonic times, you would get a complete human. You would get a human that, quite frankly, wouldn't have needed Allison's Kiyotsugi experiment here that we have to run on teenagers of today, because their minds would have already been broken to the extent of the bowl being broken several times over, to where it's no longer an issue. It's just kind of part of their life. It's part of their upbringing, because they have this foundation in the trivium and quadrivium. And
the logic, just speaking, I was an educator in the school system for a few years, and, have taught so many different grades, but ultimately what I saw in my time in the classroom and in the school setting was the shift to Common Core. Into Common Core were the state standards that were standardized across the whole United States, so that we had this level of standard that we were teaching all of our youth to. But ever since that transition to Common Core, I feel that there were so many more gaps that were created and so many more challenges that were presented because of that shift. Speaking to those two concepts that Ben was just sharing, logic and reasoning, critical thinking, problem solving. Those are some of those gaps that I started to identify. And, I've incorporated it into my program today to really help support teens, but it's kids of all ages and even into our young adults, part of the millennial generation,
Gen Z, millennials.
Gen Z and millennials. We're seeing it across the board where they are not able to critically think or problem solve or apply that logic and reasoning because of that level of rigor and that push. Like I said, it created a lot of gaps in what we're seeing with our world today.
It's astonishing because if they would have simply been given quadrivium concepts by the age of, no kidding, third grade, it's about right for when you would get into trivium and quadrivium concepts with children to where they would absolutely be masters of them.
Oh yeah, they can definitely learn it at a young age.
Then they can spend their teenage years perfecting the astronomy arts, the musical arts, the geometry arts.
And really getting into their strengths and what they're going to offer the world and thinking about their path forward. Right now, we're not really able to do that as freely because of a lot of those foundational skills being lost. You have to have that foundation first. And that's an interesting tie-in back to the four. So, a lot of the concepts and the ideas that I share and, bring into my work and what I'm, my framework, I guess I should say, is the number 4.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like the wheel.
Yes, just like the wheel. So...
And the number 4, you've got actually one of the frameworks for critical thinking, which is a 4-step.
I started drawing up here, and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate, how to hold the mic and draw at the same time. So bear with me.
I'll hold it for you.
You don't have to. I can just maybe put it on my lap.
Oh, okay.
I think everyone can still hear me.
Yeah.
So again, thinking about the 4, and I just decided to share this concept of critical thinking. And it's called depth of knowledge. It's Webb's depth of knowledge. And there are 4 steps or 4 tiers here as it relates to thinking critically. So when you're thinking about learning something new or thinking about building knowledge, we all start at this foundation, recall. Step 1 is literally, are you able to define? Are you able to identify? Are you able to memorize or label? It's very simplistic in nature, but you have to know those things before you're able to build that depth of knowledge. So once you have that foundation, the way that this framework works is we're going to move up into step 2. So after you're able to recall and reproduce the knowledge that's being learned, then we get into application. Very basic application. This is getting into things like how and why type questions where you're thinking a little bit deeper with reasoning as to building on that first level of facts, who, what, when, where, why, very basic foundation.
It's the example of if you're at level 1 in recall and you're going to attribute this to the type of manifestation of it in the school environment is the right way to put it. Recall at level 1 is like a multiple choice test. You get a 4-answer question and it's just
it's like who, what,
recall,
when, where,
right? Trivia.
Very simplistic. Match the vocab term up. Right. Again, these things are important when you're building knowledge, but it's just the base. It's just the foundation.
But when you think about it this way too, while recall is important as a muscle memory thing for people to gain, it is not altogether necessary in the grand scheme because you have smartphones now. Because anything trivia based really isn't worth clogging your mind with. If we're talking about, again, this structure of
the thinking
mind.
About the school system too, there's a lot of drilling this level of tests, quizzes, pop quizzes, just to make sure that there's that automaticity or that fluency with the terminology. But it's kind of crazy when I look at it. And like Ben's saying, we all have smartphones. I mean, most students in today's world, especially during COVID, they have a Chromebook or a computer in front of them that they're working on. So why not teach them how to use those resources to get beyond this level 1, to continue moving into the depth, because that's ultimately what we want. So do you want me to keep going with the...
Well, you were talking about basic application too. So basic application...
Yeah, that's where you started to get into some basic reasoning.
Short answer question type of things.
How, why.
Right, yeah.
Yes. A little bit of maybe compare, contrast, right, where you're starting to apply what you know and bring it together. Then we keep going in our depth of knowledge. So we move up to step 3. Step 3 is strategic thinking. This is where in our schools, what it looks like is citing textual evidence. Not only are you able to recall and reproduce, you're able to apply, and then you're starting to gather more resources and more knowledge about that topic. So citing textual evidence, where you start to investigate topics, right? You're thinking a little bit deeper about what it is that you're learning before you get to that extended thinking. So the extended thinking is the ultimate. This is where we want to go with our depth of knowledge if you're learning something new. The extension of your thinking is where you're able to create, where you're able to design, where you're able to be innovative. So ultimately you're able to critically think.
Which is also what we've talked about with, which is funny because we keep talking about this concept too, guys, is theta. The theta frequency of the brain is activated both with creativity and with hypnosis. And these are, again, the two concepts. I bring it back to the V and the lambda again. Creativity with the upright, hypnosis with the downright. So you have this stuff reflected in plain sight. There's a spell over the top of all of us. There's no mistaking why our youth are in a state of malfeasance, lack of hope.
The reason, ultimately, with this framework and what I just drew up here right now, just for another visual, I'm definitely a visual learner, and I love to bring that piece into what I'm sharing to hopefully make it a little bit more understandable. Many of you have probably heard of Bloom's taxonomy. This is something really big, in the education world, where you're learning how to teach things in a certain way and build on that level of understanding and that level of knowledge. So at the very bottom of Bloom's, it starts with remember. From remember, we build up to understand. So do you understand it? Before you can apply and analyze. So again, do you see how it correlates to Webb's depth of knowledge as we're getting up to that strategic thinking? That's where we're starting to analyze. And then at the very top of Bloom's is create. Again, this is the ultimate. So we're going from basic understanding all the way up to extended thinking. But the issue, and my personal opinion of why there are so many gaps in the education system and with our youth that's growing up today, is in the schools, they're starting with level 1 and jumping to level 4 without the bridge or the scaffolding in between to get them there, to help kids at a young age and teenagers really start to critically think, to go from having an opinion, but not just because I said so, but having an opinion and being able to back it up with evidence and reasoning and have productive discussions, collaboration. We're missing a lot of that, and the schools and the standards have really jumped from here to here. And then we wonder why so many of our youth is struggling today, because, they don't have the appropriate steps or supports to get there, to practice this.
If anybody's tracking with what she's saying, with the opinions piece, this is mainly at the crux of what we have. There's a divisiveness component to the culture at large right now too. Again, the goal of turning the lambda upside down is, because of Common Core, all these issues she's talking about, what it ultimately equates to. We've gone through this basic understanding of the 4 steps of critical thinking, what it should look like, but only a fully activated chitta or a fully activated nous, the Greek concept of the nous, the intellect that is personified by this graphic that we keep showing, is up here. The kether, the connection to the ether. This is where the mind, the nous, the intellect, the all, the chitta lives. This is why I have the cheetah eyes, the hermetic eye of Horus, the pineal gland. Remember, Horus is represented by the Christ consciousness as well. We have all these glyphs that connect back to the Merkaba energy, the Christ consciousness, the cross. There's a mystery with the cross that we're uncovering with the Templars right now, which is not for this video. But these are all, as you can see, the eyes of the cheetah. There's a reason why the cheetah and the Egyptian cheat were so revered in terms of what they mimicked and named things in reality. There's also Sumerian relief of the pineal gland being represented here too. But the chitta, therefore the mind, is only fully active if all these steps are followed, is only fully active if we are not resonating down here. Okay? I've showed so many times on my channel, and if anybody needs to go, get a refresher on that stuff, I'll put it, you can catch it on all sorts of different platforms now. I'm going to start uploading this stuff too. But when you are not activated from your crown chakra down with the ether and the concepts we talk about, even with the technology paradigm that's shifting, you're stuck in opinion world. Stuck in opinion world. And this is what the V steganography and the spell that's emplaced by the sorcerers that put it into plain sight are doing to the population. They're keeping us in opinion world. The world is full of people with this political, what do you call it, climate right now, who are based in nothing but whatever the politics are. Politics.
Well, and it's huge in our world too, with the influence of the media, with social media, just influencing people's opinions, but them not having enough of an ability to critically think and to formulate their own opinions and to develop them into something that's deeper, where they're able to back it up with anything.
If you think about what politics are, guys, if you just break down the etymology of what the word is, politics, polarity, it's the first part of it, polarity, politics, like italics. So you've got the slanted polarities. So you have baked into the word, you have something of a psyop that's being admitted in the first place. And it prevents people from critically thinking and reaching what we do on this channel, which are conclusions. When a person can go successfully from having an opinion, which all it should be is a hypothesis rather than an opinion, you have to be able to recall, basic application, strategic think, and extended think your way up the ladder to having a conclusion, which is based in the journey that you took to get there. You can, even if you're incorrect about your conclusion, you can base it on your critical thinking process. And then you're much more open to shifting your thinking should you have to, because you're much more willing to take those steps and say, oh, I get it, when somebody else gives you something that's of value. I've got here in my notes, this is what debating used to be. Debating, it's all about winning. It's all about being right in today's world. But in ancient Greece, it wasn't about winning. Pythagorean, the Platonic and Pythagorean debates were much more about truth. When you had so it was based in three things, okay? In order to be able to produce an argument about something to be rendered incorrect, correct, you first had to have the evidence of the theory or the claim about the something. Any lack of direct evidence, especially in metaphysical terms, any lack of evidence would train your thought into arriving at a conclusion. Number two, how do you intend to pay for the plan? Would be the next thing. If you were going to be putting the new idea of something into place, not necessarily paying for it with money. How do you intend to pay for it with labor? How do you intend to pay for it with engineering? How do you intend to pay for it with actually putting it from an idea into reality, is what that means. If you cannot connect those thoughts, you don't truly have an idea. It's not fully baked. You haven't gotten it through this yet. And then the third is, what's it compared to? What's your reference point for what you're arguing? What was the former basis of knowledge that humanity or everybody had as a consensus that we now have a better understanding of? Okay?
Well, and the ego is so involved in the need to be right. And the ego is a tricky thing because it's it's part of you, but it's part of that shadow side, and it can very easily dominate your actions and your perceptions and your beliefs. And it's the need to be right and the need to win instead of seeking higher truth or understanding, learning, being more open-minded. So I just wanted to point that out as you're thinking about, politics and debating and really formulating your own opinion and conclusion in whatever the topic is, because that's the thing with the depth of knowledge. It changes, even though it's all about your thinking, it changes depending on what the topic is. So, thinking about different topics in school, but also different areas in your life and what interests you, you can always be a beginner in learning something new, to just because you can critically think and formulate your own conclusions and truly investigate things in one subject area doesn't necessarily mean that you can readily do it in another one without putting in that time and that work.
But they do start
being a student.
They do start to puzzle piece together pretty exponentially once you just start to do that.
They definitely build.
And again, here's another recommendation for people to have along the same track of the critical thinking. These critical thinking cards from schoolofthought.org. They're flashcards that will help even adults. People are always asking me, again, we haven't even gotten to the book recommendations yet, but this is another recommendation we use with the kids. We have posters that have this knowledge on there. Go to schoolofthought.org and you can order yourself some of these critical thinking cards that will help to train your mind in your spare time just by looking at them and going through them.
It's all about
and reading them.
Logical fallacies, the logical fallacies that we commit,
cognitive biases,
and the cognitive biases that we embody.
But you can think, and so you can think about, going back to Allison's chart, the lambda being fully expressed critical thinking, the V being the opinions that aren't based in the critical thought that can be reaffirmed in anything. So what we were talking about, though, we want to get back to critical thinking in the school system. Do away with Common Core. We've got a lot of these things I've brought her in for the expertise on. But what we're talking about now, guys, and because I'm going to transition to a video that we're going to share. It's a Ken Wheeler video. Has everything to do with what we're talking about with debating. If we're gonna move forward with this type of a world, resonate in the Merkaba and kill the fear that is the mind killer, which is the theme of what the V Steganography is. I hope you guys are seeing this. This is the kind of the whole message, the real baseline. Christ is the way message. Christ is the way in terms of the Merkaba. 7.83 hertz is the frequency of the earth. It is also the frequency of the Merkaba. No friggin' duh. We got to resonate with rooting ourselves in the earth. And so fall is a good time to learn about all this stuff, which is why we're doing it. But debating, getting critical thought, talking about concepts like this out in the open so we can create discussions on our various channels and things are baby steps toward getting this debate world back. But we also, I set a term at the end of that, which was purposeful, and that was consensus. There does end up being consensus of the senses. Remember the senses, the five senses. In order to make sense of this world, we have to lock certain rules of thumb into place that may only be truths to us for specific periods of time before our knowledge advances. But too much consensus can bog us down, and that's what the world has got us into, and that's what the V argues for too. Is there's too much consensus in the world. So I'm going to briefly put this over on a Ken Wheeler video. He's going to tell us about why consensus has a tendency to drive us to ignorance. Here it goes, and I'll render some thoughts along the way.
Wearing that striped shirt that makes me look even fatter than I am. Oh well, who cares? Can't polish a turd, right? They say. Even though this pertains mostly to practical matters, it is still pure metaphysics, and it is truth by consensus. And there's no greater evil than truth by consensus. The motto that I live by, which is my own motto, is that nothing true is popular, and nothing popular is true.
That's a really good one. Everybody write that one down. Nothing true is popular. Nothing popular is true. I couldn't tell you that. I mean, that is about as close to the truth as anything gets.
There are obviously some minor exceptions to this. Kind of like there is general consensus that you shouldn't lay a hand on like old folks in wheelchairs, something like that, for example. Which of course we all have truth on that, and that is also to consensus. So don't point out outliers like that. For example, I like to point out a couple of them, and these are ones that I specialize in, but there's so many countless thousands. Atomism and the Termanada. And also, too, I'd like to point out stuff on YouTube. You could always tell, well, at least I can, other people can't, obviously so, that if it's incredibly popular, then it's nothing but a bunch of nonsense. And I'm not merely just referring to the most popular YouTube channels, but I'll use them as an example, even though when making this video I wasn't planning on it. But they really are kind of a perfect example. The top 3 YouTube photography channels, for example. These people are about nothing other than affiliate links and lining their pockets. Everything they say is unintelligent, it's not useful, it's counterproductive. And they really don't know what they're talking about. I mean, they absolutely do not know what they're talking about. And not referring to them. And I don't really watch other YouTube channels, believe it or not. I don't, like unless a lot of people tell me, oh, check out so-and-so's new video. But the top channels on physics, and I don't want to mention the guy's name, starts with a V.
Starts with a V. I'll mention his name because you guys should stay away from this guy, Vsauce. 16.2 million subscribers. Horseshit! It's all horseshit, just like Ken's saying. V central to the steganography of whatever the false reality is that they're trying to push down your throats. Consensus-based science. Consensus-based science, not truth-based science. Are you seeing? I can continue here. These are really good thoughts he rendered just the other day.
And he's got like 7.5 million subscribers.
16.2.
This guy does nothing other than regurgitate, as this vomitous effluence that pours from his mouth, which is nothing other than a horrific regurgitation of existing, agreed upon, peer-reviewed consensus. He goes around and he makes some nice polished videos, and you can really fool the unintelligent people with highly polished videos. I mean, you could fill them with the most inane garbage imaginable, so long as they're edited well and they're dazzling for the eyes to look at. And that, of course, is the mind trap for unintelligent people.
The mind trap, the mind killer. He's actually talking about fear here. Being in that state of mind is a state of fear. You're actually leaving up your own intellectual knowledge to other people to do for you. And that's what the fallacy of this whole Vsauce channel is that, its most fervent subscribers think that they give up their own intellectual power to such a degree that because they don't want to think themselves, it hurts too bad, or whatever the deal is that keeps them down in stage 1, recall, opinions. Or actually, as we've determined, opinions kind of happens at ground zero. It doesn't even happen at stage 1. Opinions are very much the ground zero. It's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope to give up your thought to these people that you would perceive just because you wouldn't have yourself understand the concepts to begin with. But it sounds like Ken's saying, with the high production values and the fancy schmancy talk, that you think that they know something you don't, when they probably do, but they're using some technique against you to hide it from you, in fact. With the V. It's a glyph, everybody, for mind control, as we've come to determine.
I mean, it really is. There's so many of them, but that's absolutely one of them. Anyway, this guy's got 7.5 million subscribers. And I was going to make a video on the dual slit experiment right after this, and I thought, before making this video, I want to see what this unintelligent quasi-human being said about it, because he makes a video about every point or topic in physics, and just the most inane, horrific, unimaginable drivel imaginable. Also, too, when people use the word peer-reviewed, when you say peer-reviewed, this is substantially no different than saying consensus. If consensus were true, then you should join the most popular religion. Well, there's a lot of people. This has got X number of billion followers. It's got to be true. I got approached at a photography conference. So who sells the most digital cameras? And I told the truth. I said, well, Sony actually does. Well, there you go. And this unintelligent person thought that, well, that's proof right there. This guy agreed with me. So he just walked off. But he had no idea within his own unintelligent mind that that doesn't mean anything. Absolutely not. This is the reason why trash has to scream.
An example of recall, everybody. He's arguing, basically what Ken's saying is, he had an argument with somebody over who the best camera manufacturer was. And so many people would say Sony because they're Sony fanboys. Oh, it connects to everything. And Sony's good, but they don't make everything the best. Ken, in fact, argues for Fujifilm, which I agree. Fujifilm and, Nikon is his runner-up. And then he, Canon, a step below that. So he's got his reasons for critical thinking this way. But a guy comes up to him and just has recall type of information available to him. Well, what are Sony's sales? Sony sells the most, so they must be the best. And that's a fallacy. That is, again, a logical fallacy. And you'll learn how to decode these things for yourself with these flashcards in no time flat if you get these as I've recommended. But that's the whole thing, the virus of the mind killer that we're talking about. Vsauce, this Mind Field is his show. YouTube Learning Against Learning, the casuistry of Jesuitry of YouTube. There's another area that we can look into here later on when we've tied some of the concepts together. I'll come back to this, but the Veni Vidi Vici theme, Latin phrase coined by Julius Caesar, used the phrase in 47 BC. 47 degrees on the Freemason compass. 47 is the reverse of 74. 74 is the divine number associated with Christ, and the Merkaba in Gematria. So we've got some of the things that are tying us to this as well. But Veni Vidi Vici, came, saw, I conquered. And with the V steganography being central to it, of course, we're going to come back to that and kind of close out an example that actually Allison knows a little bit of something about. Doug Funny from Nickelodeon cartoon. And when he used these phrases, Veni Vidi Vici, in his magic act. Not used as a magic term. But yeah, we'll get back to that in a bit. For now, get back to the full screen here. Hold on, I've got somebody from the Theta chat saying, "Hey guys, I think Phoenix Enigma recommended you the unimaginable imaginable. The inferior product can win based on integration. No one likes Linux because you can't connect it to other systems." All right. That may be the case. I've used Linux in the past. Wasn't a fan of it either. But I'm glad you came here, Zeralath. Glad you're over here and that you meandered over. We're streaming tonight to Theta. You can find us on DLive. We're streaming to Allison's YouTube channel and my YouTube channel congruently. And this is effectively a primer, as I've put in the title of my video, for a couple of the concepts for V-steganography, which we're walking through. And then at the end of the video, I will be giving my book recommendations, which everybody wants so badly. And then I'll probably put those a time capture in the description when I post the video, just in case somebody just wants to hear the book recommendations. But anyway, what I intend to discuss in terms of a couple of these concepts of the five, and in some ways to give some people some more tools, to get out of the V Steganography. It's funny that Lao Tzu has some philosophies of which are fivefold to help us see through this as well. What we're going to do is take a short break. I'm going to play some music. Allison and I are going to go take a short break. We are back, and for the rest of this video, we're going to be talking about, as before the break I had alluded to, we're going to talk about a couple of different strategies you can employ to get these things, these concepts rather, that we are discussing more familiar with your body or your mind, your soul, your spirit, or same thing there.
Your mind is so
emotional
powerful,
body.
Your mental clarity and your overall mental health and emotional health, that contributes to your ability to be able to learn and to build that depth of knowledge and critically think. And
as Nikola Tesla famously said, you can think deeply, but not think clearly. The lambda is thinking clearly. The V is thinking deeply. He was saying this about Einstein, about his ability to think deeply, but not clearly. Ken Wheeler, who we just listened to, in fact, has a really good term for Einstein and the like, the atomists, about the atomic, way of thinking about science. He also, he calls, Tesla actually called them the fuzzy-haired crackpot. But the technocrats, the materialists, the atomists, these guys are all the same. They have this backwards thinking. They're mathematicians, not scientists. If they were scientists, they would have the trivium and quadrivium principles baked into them. Clearly, they do not have these. So without going too far away from everything we've got up here, it's getting a little bit busy. So can you erase this?
yes.
So everybody, before she does, remember, the Merkaba, the concept of this is the goal by which, by resonating with an upright lambda type mindset, your Merkaba, the heart chakra, is awakened. This is the process by which Jesus talked about. This is the Christ consciousness. This is what this is what I'm a purveyor of in terms of the actual things that have been lost in humanity. Yes. Couple of concepts to drive these things home is what we're going to go over before we get to the book recommendations. Because Christ is the thing that Jesus taught. It's the thing that we need to understand in order to totally comprehend the V Steganography. And the doctrine of the church always gets who and what Jesus was backwards because of the V Hierophant card that we find in tarot. We were talking about the wheel tarot earlier with the metaphysical man, but the V itself is the doctrine that religion puts over the top of people and veils their eyes. So we've got an ancient fivefold path to awakening that will lead us up. That's in a different way. Allison is very boldly and accurately pointed at the critical thinking path, the 4 steps that people are not taking in terms of academia and how we need to write the Common Core framework of today. But what I'm going to write up here is more core to the human experience, to activating this whole structure that we've been looking at all night. Locking it into place, the metaphysical man. Okay, and how do we achieve these things in a manner of thinking? It's a very complex diagram that I understand, but it's very complex. There's a lot going on here. So instead of pointing at this as a diagram of sorts, again, here it is for you to see. It's quite complex, right? What I'm going to show is a teaching of Tao, which is truly what Jesus was a Taoist, going to the East and learning the true nature of Buddhism, Taoism, how these things were congruent with each other, learning about the Chitta, learning about the Nous, We're going to listen to another video by Ken Wheeler after I explain these topics here. But Lao Tzu may have been, as a lot of people think Horus was in Egypt, one and the same with Jesus, just because of his journeys across vast areas in his 20s, going to the East and learning all these concepts that we're regurgitating today and actually attempting to translate. So in modern terms that people take a cipher like the V cipher that I've discovered and apply it toward their intellectual progressions. Okay. That's the whole point of everything we're doing here. And so the fivefold path that was laid out, that's a much easier diagram to understand than this metaphysical man, is related to something Lao Tzu labeled as the individual bonds or the 5 virtues. There's V Steganography, right? So the 5 virtues. And so this is 5 and V, pretty central to this, but as you'll see if you even look this up, these are Lao Tzu's principles of freeing the mind. Number 1 is compassion. Without compassion, we cannot have reference points for where we're headed, because compassion truly is to reflect on that template of the human experience and to create something of a framework. That just like science, if you're not creating a hypothesis for what you think the experiment is going to yield, then you're not going to have a very good experiment. So in the grand experiment of life, as we're coursing through this, if you're not attempting to have a hypothesis, a reference point for what the experience might be based on what others may or may not have experienced and that have been influenced with you in your past, you can't have a framework. Not to mention, compassion just is part of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would do unto them, right? Number 2, the second part of that golden rule is equality. And equality just simply means balance. So the classical yin and yang symbolism here. Equality. You have to keep this. You have to keep the two forces in balance with each other. In metaphysical terms, the dielectricity and the magnetism in a perfect dance with one another. We won't get too into the weeds on that stuff today. But number 3, loyalty. Number 4, we have maturity. Okay, so loyalty itself is what they call the integrity path through the way. The way. And the way is actually what Taoism is based upon. And the way is exemplified by a Merkaba. Because the way is to resonate in the love, in the heart chakra, in the love frequency, by activating your mind, by aligning it with the lambda. Hi, Voids. Just recognize you joined over on Theta. Good to have you. So the way is, in the Gnostic Christian sense, the same as the Taoist sense. These are the cross references that you can verifiably prove that Jesus was a Taoist, and that the principles he was putting into parable in the Middle East were only reduced from the concepts that he learned in the Far East. Okay, because I am kind of the mind that Lao Tzu very well could have been Jesus. The teachings came about at approximately this same time. It's very interesting. So maturity creates authority. And this makes sense because if you're finally at loyalty, the step of loyalty, connecting with the way, you're connecting with your intuition, you're at least becoming aware of the lambda being activated. And awareness leads to what? this is part of something that you're an expert in.
Oh, and so I was waiting for that. So again, the 4, everything with my framework is always a 4. So when you start with that awareness, then you move into acceptance. Acceptance is by far one of the things I think that we struggle with the most in humanity with teens and adults, is coming to that place of acceptance, because there are actually a lot of emotions that get involved before you reach that place of acceptance. Things like, grief, anger, denial. We have all of, like I said, these emotions before we arrive at that place of acceptance, but that is the path. That is the middle way, is, as quickly as you can getting to that place of acceptance, because from there, then you can adjust. So when you can adjust, you can make changes. You're using what you know and what you've learned and that wisdom and knowledge to advance ultimately. So that's the 4 A's. I'll go ahead and write those up here.
So she's got awareness, acceptance, adjustment, advancement. And the reason I insert that is in order to get from loyalty to maturity in this framework, these are actually the things that you have to do as an individual. So this is kind of a progression in a manner of speaking. There isn't a through line to this. You can do these truly in any order, but to bridge that gap is what you need to in order to gain authority. You can't start truly with maturity, if that makes sense. What comes from integrating, and what's interesting about the 5 virtues is they themselves, just like the ether is the 5th element that something else binds together everybody. There are 4 elements: the fire, the earth, the wind, and the water. But the 5th that binds them all together and makes them operate, the thing that turns the wheel, is the ether. And in this way, that's the enigmatic 5 that comes from the 4. And so that's interesting, right? That you have, before you can reach the 5th, you have to integrate the 4, because the 5th is honor. And truly, honor only comes by way of the experience. You can think of this almost like the path of the samurai as well. I've talked extensively about this before too, so we won't mire ourselves with it. But honor is that all-encompassing, cohesive glue that puts all of these other ones into perspective. Just like the ether is the cohesive glue that is the element that holds the other ones together. So the 4 and the 5 are very, very significant in all of this. We can talk about the numerology of the 3 some other time, because it gets more into metaphysical understanding. But because all we want to talk about here today is, again, the V steganography and the foundations for it. So this is a framework. Number 1, compassion. Number 2, equality. Number 3, loyalty. 4, maturity. 5, honor. The 5-fold path of the philosophy of virtue from Lao Tzu. Now, these are also the cohesive bonds, just like in the metaphysical man example, just like we've been showing all night with this graphic. What binds us to the reality is the 5 and the conjunction with the 4, as we're talking about. If you notice, the Ouroboros is actually circling around the ankles. Okay, so the serpent energy is circling around here as well. And what's binding us to reality are these things. This is not necessarily bad, but we are bound here. And this tends to get into some other concepts where the V can conflate in terms of banking. So part of this is, as an example, showing people the basic examples of how V is used in plain sight. Okay, so I'm going to hope everybody gets the 4 A's of awareness, acceptance, adjustment, and advancement to get from the loyalty to maturity phase. And then honor being the 5th step after 1, compassion, 2, equality, 3, loyalty, 4, maturity, and 5, honor. If you wanted a step-by-step construct of a way to reach the lambda mindset, this is it, with 5 virtues. All right, so I'm going to erase all this because, again, as it relates to the structure of binding and bonds. Bonds can be good, like in the sense that we're talking about the bonds of humanity. These are the 5 virtues that make us human and bind us to this realm, which give us this experience. All good things, right? But as other things can do, like when we were talking about the 5 and the V tarot cards combined with the XV, the 15, we've got the Devil tarot card. The Devil tarot card is all about bondage, by which slavery occurs by the male and the female characters that can slip out of their bondage at any time. They don't have to be there.
Isn't that with all of our vices too, and what holds us here? And
well, yeah, and it's
different for everyone. You know, we have these certain things that pull us down back in this dense reality, and a lot of times that's with our addictions and our vices.
It's also a banking term.
Yeah.
So check this out, guys. We've talked about this in the past too. Banking. I'm going to use a different color pen because
I know our markers are dying.
The blue one was tough here.
The brown's good.
I'll use the brown one. So what we have are some banking terms I'm going to go over, which kind of have the V put into place instead of the lambda. Remember using the same kind of construct of polarity, that 36 degree, just out of phase mindset. We have bonds in banking, which are related to slavery, right? We have bonds. We also have, I have them all written down here in order from which I was going. Oh, yeah. Cost. We're going to go over here. We're going to go over redeem, save, and trust. So these are all terminologies in which the Bible actually prescribes. We have bonds, cost, redeem, save, trust. And this is the Constantine version of the Bible that, of course, came after the Council of Nicaea. But this is where everything in terms of the Christ way of the current, Catholic version of what reality is, it's all based on banking and enslavement to banking. So that very same devil card, because the trick is, the spell is, the V is in place, just like we were showing earlier with Vsauce. The thing about channels like Vsauce, like Ken Wheeler was talking about, is very damaging because they're the most popular. They're the most popular channels. They've got the highest production value. They know how to throw money around. They've got backing by somebody. Somebody's putting a mind field in control. Look at even the serpent coming out of the eye here. The bats. They're tricking your serpent energy. And we even have the V Steganography over here. Of course, this whole channel is called Vsauce. But that is how the glyph is used in plain sight to broadcast this type of narrative. While only ancillary to banking, it creates a false academic environment that keeps the current banking paradigm going. A bond is something you can invest in based on the sovereignty of certain constructs of certain nations. It's speculating on the sovereignty, which is slavery. What kind of labor has to be put into the system to account for it? You have cost structures, okay? Remember, I've talked about things costing. The penta cost, for instance, okay? The Pentecost. The penta is the 5. The cost. What cost? What was the cost of this event? This false framing of this event, as the Catholics would tell it, not as the Apocrypha would tell it, but the Catholics would tell it. Well, 5 senses. as we have always pointed out here. So one can say that the five senses of humanity were the price that got paid to trick us into thinking the false narrative of that event. It's not to say that the cross and the crucifixion weren't very significant, but the Pentecost, there's something veiled there. We know that Jesus likely copulated with Mary Magdalene, had children, started the Merovingian bloodline. This is what we're talking about, the Templars protecting so much. So why, with the five, do the Catholics not want you to know that happened? That somehow Jesus ascended into heaven and left the earth, okay? We have redeem. Jesus the Redeemer. The Redeemer of what? The Redeemer of you? To redeem something is to redeem a note for a profit. Jesus didn't redeem anybody. Jesus taught them the way, as we just talked about with the fivefold path. We have saving. Jesus saves. Jesus saves. Jesus saves? What did Jesus save? Did he save you? Did he save you, truly? Because this is what most Christians think. This is this passive thinking that the prophets used to warn about in these times that we live in, that this kind of stuff, the V steganography, would be placed over the top of people. They'd be under a spell of this banking system. There is no trust left in this environment, right? So this is all, in a manner of speaking, something that we need to awaken to. These are the types of events we need to re-examine, and we'll do deep dives on the Pentecost and all these things later on in the future. But it's very incumbent on everybody that they start to see these types of themes especially the couple years to come. Because it means everything for balancing us out and finding out the truth. So what say you? Is anything that I've just digested, especially as it relates to the children and what you see? What are the roadblocks that you see with the kids now, and what do people need to do in order for any of this to get locked into place? Like what do parents need to do even,
Well, I think it's ultimately just thinking about balance and that idea of balance and balancing your energy. And I had to let the dog out. That's why I left for part of the banking here. But you want me specifically?
All we're talking about is slavery as a system. The V is the spell that's cast on everybody. It's how we can recognize the spell. But what else besides just recognizing the V can people do? Like, what is incumbent on parents to take action with to help break the bonds of a banking system, break the bonds of an academic system that's lied to us. And of course we're gonna see another Ken Wheeler video here too, after this, about the mind itself. But I want you to tie together those concepts for people because you're the expert.
It's ultimately going back to that idea of critical thinking and allowing your children to fail, allowing them to learn from their mistakes, allowing them to navigate their own lives and to problem solve. I feel like as a society, we're so quick to jump in and make things easier. But I feel like in doing that, we're taking away a lot of those opportunities for learning and for growth and for ultimately evolution for humanity. So, allowing kids to problem solve and critically think and encouraging them, to develop their own opinion and back it up with something, and that's the whole essence of lifelong learning and being a lifelong learner. You can always, benefit from learning more and from educating yourself and, tying it back to the critical thinking for you.
So look at, hold on, I have her page pulled up here. If you guys go to kiyotsugi.com, you guys can find her Allison's stuff. She's of course going to be over on her YouTube channel, Allison Anchor, which is right here. Allison Anchor. Subscribe to her over there as well. You can see. Oh, we got two people.
Looks like I got one.
Got two people watching over there. Because she's going to be talking and expanding a lot more on these types of concepts as it relates to the family unit, how it can be, how the false energies can be corrected for within the family unit, rather, I think is what I'm trying to say. Healthy implements from a wellness perspective with diet, with supplements. She has a 4 bodies framework with the whole
when you're thinking about
model.
health and balance, ultimately, I keep saying ultimately, what I bring it down to is thinking about ways that you can enhance and improve all 4 areas of health. So number 1 is probably the most obvious, your physical health. Those are things like getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, exercising regularly, eating healthy. That's all related to your physical health, but that's just one dimension of health. So the next important area of health to think about is mental health. Mental health is so important in today's world when we're thinking about all these people, myself included, that fall into these categories of feeling anxious or depressed, or, we have to really balance our mental health, our emotional health. Right? How do you use emotions as a tool, but not allow yourself to fall into the victim mentality and saying, poor me, or always feeling angry or sad. You can't get stuck in your emotions. You're meant to use them as a tool to learn, again, to build that knowledge and to grow. And then the 4th aspect of health is spiritual health. And that is something I think that is completely absent in our youth world today, because a lot of the things from a religious standpoint, the religion isn't there anymore. And a lot of times there was spirituality brought in with religion. But when we don't have that, and we don't have that spiritual essence and that idea that we're connected to something greater than ourselves, that really impacts our overall health. So I'll be doing more videos just on, ways to improve all different aspects and dynamics of health, with tips and tricks and strategies that you can use to better improve that. So
everybody follow her, and you'll be able to have. She'll expand after she's not so entrenched in helping teenagers survive the pitfalls of whatever the world has in store from during this COVID period.
Yeah, trying to plan homecoming during the week of elections. It's quite a challenge.
We're doing
in the
like a whole
households
homecoming thing for the teens that we work with.
Crazy energies out there in the world this week. So,
but the best thing you can follow her for will be her yoga. She'll start doing
yoga too, because yoga is so important for physical and mental and spiritual health.
That's right.
I guess emotional too. It's just balancing it all out. I love yoga. I love sharing yoga to really help people, better their lives, empower them.
But truly, again, the perfect segue into kind of our last thing we're going to discuss before I give those book recommendations and we log off here. But I've been saying we're going to talk about Ken Wheeler integrating what the chitta and the noose are, which ultimately is what yoga work is. People misrepresent that it's more of a physical exercise, but the physical is actually just kind of an added benefit.
You to the mental.
Locks the mental into place.
Balances the emotional and spiritual, but the physical, the asanas are just one.
That's right.
Aspect of it, and it's actually the very basic apps. If you bring it back to that depth of knowledge, the asanas and the postures that you're going through, that's that level 1 of depth of knowledge of what yoga truly has to offer you and to offer the collective if we can all work on improving ourselves. So I do a lot of yoga on there.
But this is actually part of what's backwards. The V mindset that people have about yoga is that it's rooted in materium and not in the mind. And that's the backwards thinking. And this is the shame that I see with most people, because it's all about vanity. There's another
and
V
what you
word.
Look like. Yeah.
And it's not.
It's really not. It's about your own experience. It's about developing that humility and that giving yourself that grace and that love to work through wherever you're at that day. So I just want to clear up that common misconception that you have to be super flexible. You have to be able to do the splits to do yoga. And yoga is just all about the breath. It's all about strengthening that mind-body connection.
Well, reaching the higher state of mind by way of the breath.
Yeah, through that mind-body connection and strengthening that.
On the mind. So. And part of the problem that is got this all confused too is just the way by which the West learned about yoga. And that's what Ken's going to talk about here before we shift gears. I'll pull this video up because it gives perhaps the viewer, you guys, a better understanding of what the chitta or the noose is than I've explained. I've explained it several different ways on the channel before, but maybe his point of view of it will show you what I mean. And then also he's going to give a little bit of a history lesson here as to why things are so confusing in the West as it relates to this and why we can't quite understand this concept to wrest control back of it.
What the original teaches. Completely 100% contradictory. And that, again, is why all early Buddhist iconography never, ever, ever, ever depicts. And they all agree that they'll have worshipers like this, surrounding, the Tathagata, or the Buddha, is shown as an empty seat, shown as a pillar of fire. It's never shown as a psychophysical flesh and blood entity, because that is heretical. That is basically like saying, because the psychophysical is Maradharma, or the dharma of Mara, i.e. evil. In other words, you are praising something that is by its very essence evil, i.e. the psychophysical.
And the psychophysical is all we are. So he's talking about, and to praise that is to be rooted in the V, the empty seat. You see all the iconography here he's even discussing, not in terms of V Cipher, but he's saying all of the same things that we're saying based on the doctrine. So I'll let him continue.
The persona. Yeah? That thing you see in the mirror made out of flesh and blood. That is very funny. It might be nerdy funny, and you might not think it's funny. But all those Buddha statues are not the term Buddha by definition in any way, shape, or form. They are not. And that is heretical from the perspective of original Buddhist doctrine. Original. Yeah. Anyway, getting back to suffering. Buddhism, nowhere within doctrine, teaches an end to physical suffering. It's not my opinion. It's a fact.
This is really key. The Western form of Buddhism, how many times have you heard, even when we go up to Sedona and stuff? Oh, the end of suffering, nirvanas. You have to go through suffering to end suffering. All these types of things. This isn't a discipline of the mind. No, you can only get through there through your discipline and your works and your wisdom. And it's a very key distinction that we need to make, because suffering is passive. It hurts, but it's passive. It doesn't require any work. It doesn't require any action. And this is actually what
requires acceptance.
I mean, it requires complacence is what it requires. And so this is the trick. And again, what people get mired in the physical, the psychophysical, as Ken's talking about, the V, not the lambda, which is the above instead of the below.
Gautama's last hours in any translation, is physical pain, suffering, bent over, retching, and that was from eating sukarmadava, as a Pali term for what he ate that poisoned him. Sukarmadava. Su being pressings or squeezings doesn't mean pig flesh. Okay, yeah, I'll translate it as they translate it as sukarmadava, but it doesn't say that. It's su, the juice of the madava plant, the karamadava plant. Excuse me, su. And then karamadava. Karamadava is this orange-looking fruit that grows on a bush in India. It's poisonous. It has a milky excretion. It's wickedly poisonous. So that's actually what he died from eating. Yeah. Bent over and suffering. Buddhism nowhere teaches the end. Fascinatingly enough, all of this, of course, is one of the reasons why Dr. Anandi Kichish Kumaraswamy, a guy whose son I knew, and granted me the works to all of his father's writings. He was on the stamp of India. He famously said, and he was 100% accurate, Buddhism today is most famous for everything it originally never taught. Oh, wise words. Wiser words have never, ever been said. If you type in Anatta or Anatman in a Google search or Bing search, it says,
Anatta means no soul, and Buddhism is different than Hinduism because Buddhism teaches that there is no soul.
Literally, you'll find 100,000 websites to say this, and it is not only illogical, nonsensical, it is non-doctrinal. I know all 576 occurrences of the Tormanada. There is nobody on this earth, whether you think that's egotistical or not, that knows more about that term than I do. Its context, its usage, I know every single, all 576 of them. I do. Nowhere does Buddhism teach that there is no soul. Absolutely nowhere. It teaches this is not the soul, that is not the soul. This is via negativa. This is apophaticism. This is neti, not this. This is not the soul, that is not the soul. Neti, meaning not this, not that. Buddhism, nowhere in doctrine, absolutely nowhere, it teaches that there is no. It says the soul is the light, the dipa, the only refuge. Attaka so saranam gatika. Atasarana ananna. Why am I?
We don't need to know all the terms in the Sanskrit, but you guys get the point. By the manner by which even he says that you overcome this is by activating the chitta or the nous, which again I will visualize for you in the metaphysical man image we've been referencing all night. I'll reference this much in the future. Up here, the mind, the nous, the chitta, activates in the pineal gland. Okay, this is what all this symbolism represents. This is why the label of what this is, because it represents and matches up with the eye of Horus, which is the pineal gland. You see why labels are simply representations of the inspiration by which they were derived, which ultimately is the factor of creativity, which we create through this pentagonal structure, alchemy. That's all this is, guys. This is alchemy. This is philosopher's stone. We are philosopher's stones, every single one of us. We were created through a process of alchemy, I think, by the gods, DNA manipulation, and we were turned into actual philosopher's stones. I think, of course, this is what the Full Metal Alchemist series that I decoded on my Patreon channel went through. But that's it. The nous, the chitta. That is what the V Steganography is all about, activating. And so, as promised, I'm going to go through some books that in the time capture, people can just fast forward through if this is the only thing they're going to get out of the video. But there are a lot of different ways, fiction is what we started with, by which to approach the V Steganography. Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and what's that?
Do you want me to hold?
Oh, maybe put them down over next to you after I'm done. And Frank Herbert's Dune. Dune is coming out later this year, by which we're going to do some decodes on that pretty heavily because of the concepts. Of course, that we were talking about earlier. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the mind killer. It will kill the nous. So beyond that, the other works of fiction that I do also recommend to people. We've talked about on my channel actually quite considerably as well. I've got all three of the tomes of Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz series. Each one of these is book one, which is novel containing the first 5 books. The Emerald City of Oz. These are the Fall River Press versions of these books, and so I have the whole collection of them. The Emerald City of Oz has number 6 through 10, and then 11 through 15 in The Magic of Oz. I actually think this one's a little bit harder to come by, The Magic of Oz, if you're actually looking for these. But either at any way you can collect the Wizard of Oz novels, you'll get clued more into a lot of the Templar legacy, banking collapse mystery, Saturn and moon mysteries, everything that we really talk about, it will start to become apparent to you. The reason why I'm mentioning works of fiction for people that are kind of coming to this stuff to begin with is that yes, Zarelath, Dragon Ball Z is the other anime that I'm doing right now. I've got plenty of them. A lot of the animes. I'm not going to be doing the anime recommendations here, but Full Metal Alchemist, Dragon Ball Z, those are the ones I'm focusing on right now. But also works of fiction, all in the same. Just like the books, you start to see these patterns, these things playing out. And then so you naturally ask yourself, okay, Who were the authors? How do they know this stuff? Why does this all connect through this common glyph? And you get you end up getting your questions answered by way of the very intuitive process that we were outlining with the fivefold path of virtues earlier with the Lao Tzu framework. Secondly, beyond The Wizard of Oz, everybody's got to get a copy of Lewis Carroll's Adventures in Wonderland and Other Stories. This is the compendium where it's got both Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass in it. All very metaphysical representations of the Isis goddess mystery that the Venus faction, I think, is working so hard. The Templars are working so hard to bring out. You also can go through the history lesson of Frank Baum and Lewis Carroll and who they were connected to in the royals. And that's always a fun exercise when reading those books. And it's just, it's perfect to introduce your kids to as well. Speaking of activating the chitta or the nous in a child's mind, these books will awaken it more than anything because they're codified in a way that is meant to engage with the theta frequency that they're emitting.
Imagination, creativity. Yep, it's all that theta
at that
frequency.
young age.
Yep.
It locks in the lambda into place so they never have to get corrupted by the V. So other ones. Dan Brown is a favorite of mine. More fiction that we're starting off with. I didn't include the typical Da Vinci Code in here. I rather included The Origin, which is actually the same character as in the Da Vinci Code. It's Inferno, La Symbol, and the Da Vinci Code. This is the fourth book in the series, but this more speaks to what we're going through right now as humanity. Whoever Dan Brown is, again, connected to the Templars maybe. We talk about James Cameron, George Lucas in the film context. Dan Brown is real similar in the written form in terms of giving us answers in plain sight as to our origins as a humanity. His other book, Deception Point, all about Antarctica as it relates to origins. Need I say more? Just read those two novels. They'll have a profound effect on you. And then Dan Brown's Digital Fortress, which is all about the reality that we face right now about our mind being our mind being integrated into the matrix. Okay. So in a more real way than even I think the Matrix series points out, because the Matrix is so highly metaphorical. Dan Brown's stuff in a way kind of puts you into a narrative that's believable in the context of your own life. And if you can open your mind to these clues, you'll have a good time applying the V Steganography to those books. So, second of all, the spiritual context of the fivefold path, of course, Lao Tzu's text, the Tao Te Ching, is where you get those concepts locked into place, along with some other spiritual texts that are very congruent. The Bhagavad Gita, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the poems of Rumi, the essential Kabbalah, because this is a shortened, truncated version of the Kabbalah. It's not the entire magical text, but it gives you a framework of what this the metaphysical man that we're referencing all night has been. And then, of course, the Way of the Pilgrim, which is more of like the closer to the Templars' creed than anything. It was Russian Orthodoxy, the Slavic nations, where that came out of. These are just some essential spiritual texts which are at any point in one's life referenceable to help lock in these things into place. Hi, Melody Core. How are you? Thanks for joining the Theta stream. Good to have you. So, beyond that, we actually have some other texts. So these are all texts in which will enrich the lambda frequency in one's mind to overcome the V cipher. But it is also incumbent on all of us to read the very books that are the closest representation of the strategies and tactics by which the V Cipher is based. We've learned that the Jesuits used the art of war against us, the Machiavellian principles of the Borgian class and the Catholicized version of our history. They're all based in these concepts: the art of war and the Prince by Machiavelli, Niccolo Machiavelli. Sun Tzu being the Chinese supposed general who may or may not have ever existed, but the concepts are that of Jesuit casuistry, which leads right into another book, which here I'll get my Evernote server up to reference. The Rulers of Evil, Useful Knowledge about Governing Bodies, which you can access in PDF format on my Evernote server, or you can even find this online. F. Tupper Sassi wrote this book about the Jesuit agenda and casuistry and pieced together a fairly coherent thesis about the founding of the country. I disagree with some of his assertions about George Washington and things, of course, because I don't know if he's got the correct perspective on that, but he certainly found the pattern of Jesuit casuistry in plain sight. And this is a must read for anybody who is looking into the arts of V, as it were. The next one as well, which I've referenced on the channel, might as well just since I'm here, is the Ringmakers of Saturn. Ringmakers of Saturn by Norman Berggren, which is what we've been referencing so much over on my Patreon channel to learn a little bit more about what the construct of Saturn might signify in terms of hijacking our mind and our nous. Could it be a musical instrument against us of sorts, right? So those are a couple must-reads that you can get in PDF format over on my Evernote server if you're I think $15 pledge on or above on Patreon. And HP did download the Norman Berggren book. So they are available for free online. You don't need, like I said, I think both of those you can search online and get. Second of all, regarding that same topic though, we've been talking a lot on Patreon about the ether and how the fifth element of the ether is used for and against us, how it factors into Nikola Tesla's science and other sciences, in fact, relating to the Saturn myth and the V Steganography. The cymatics principles written about by Hans Jenny in this book, Cymatics, will teach the reader all about how the ether is used as the fabric for all four of those elements. You will learn much about the harmony of the spheres concept of Pythagorean geometry just by reading this book. And you'll see, quite frankly, how the concepts that we're discussing on the Patreon side relate to the hypothesis we have about Saturn as this ultimate instrument. And of course, how are those tactics being used against us here on Earth, using Nikola Tesla's technologies and sciences? Under an Ionized Sky by Alana Freeland talks about chemtrails, the space fence lockdown and such. This is actually something we've read several times on the channel, in addition to usually in conjunction with the Secrets of Cold War Technology book by Jerry Vassilatos. So this is the Secrets of Cold War Technology, Project HARP and Beyond, and then of course Under an Ionized Sky, From Chemtrails to Space Fence by Alana Freeland. These can both be read alongside each other, and they're great to read. Actually, if you can do such back to back, because they'll give you an absolute different perspective on sciences related to the ether. Okay. Further concepts relating with cosmos in general, earlier Earth grid topics as it relates to the dynamics of the Earth and how we look at the buckyball structure and we're able to look at things like the temples, the frequencies, and get into these Platonic solid sacred geometries in the first place. We have to understand the geology of our environment. We have to understand the dynamics of the cosmology. Magnetic Reversals and Evolutionary Leaps is a short little book by Robert Felix that will show you how things evolve using certain dynamics that are not considered beyond the false Darwinian theories and such. And you'll learn a little bit more about cycles. To tie these concepts together, probably my favorite book of all time, seriously, Lost Star of Myth and Time, woke me up after reading this years back in a way that no other book has, and continues to prove a central component to my research of the Yuga cycle than anything. It's Walter Cruttenden that is to be credited with compiling the data from Sri Yukteswar, who is Paramahansa Yogananda's teacher, about the true cosmology of the Yuga cycle. Give us the truth of such knowledge that humanity had not had for a very long time, and bring it back into the context of what we were missing consciously. And so part of the V steganography in the context of the Yuga cycle is showing us where we're at. We are not going into the age of Aquarius, rather the age of Leo, which makes much more sense in terms of the Venus myths, the Venus passage through the horns of Taurus on July 7th of this year, which signifies all of the birth canal, birthing pains that we're going through. All of this V knowledge is represented by this passage of the precession as the sun orbits around Sirius. And this book, A Helical Helix, Solar System Dynamics, by Kashava Bhatt. Again, this is Lost Star of Myth and Time by Walter Cruttenden. Lost Star of Myth and Time by Walter Cruttenden. And then Helical Helix, Solar System Dynamics, Dr. Kashava Bhatt, PhD out of India, showing how the sun operates as a comet, as a helicoid, and passes through our galactic plane as a helicoid in a manner in which causes and proves this very movement that we're talking about with the Lost Star of Myth and Time tracking of the Yuga cycle. Beyond that, the inner reaches of outer space, metaphor as myth and as religion, locks into play. This is by Joseph Campbell, not his typically prescribed work. Typically, when people say you got to read the seminal work of Joseph Campbell, they lead you to the Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is great. It teaches all about archetype, but we're talking about locking in the metaphors as myth in a sense of locking in the V steganography and awakening the Chitta and the Nous to shake free of this false reality, realize it's a false reality and that our mind is creating it, so we can actually have a more fulfilling experience of it. And by reading this, you will, in a way, work on some of the shadow work Allison was talking about earlier in a little bit of an easier format than the Wetico virus concept. That's a little bit, harder to approach. In that same way, though, as I've referenced so many times on my channel, Dispelling Wetico by Paul Levy. Dispelling Wetico by Paul Levy will show you the evils that ail the world and the frequency control that's resultant. I needn't say a ton about this because people who have come to the channel know that V incarnate, or Wetico is V incarnate, and it is also the very evil by which the Native Americans prescribed the ultimate mind-eating shadow. Okay, so dispelling Wetico by going to the inner depths of your soul is the way to dispel it. From a philosophy perspective, philosophy and theurgy in late antiquity by Ilgis Uzdevinis is all about the philosophies of learning about the Nous and the Chitta. This book here, while medium-sized length will probably take you quite a bit of time to get through because it goes all into the Gnostic roots of Platonic mysticism, all the things that we're talking about with true Buddhism, why the suffering concept doesn't exist. It's all about overcoming the chitta or the nous. And we talk about Venus, the Venus, being this whole goddess mystery that's wrapped up in that. You'll learn a lot of the symbolism in that. And then, of course, on that same strand of Venus, the one we're talking about right now on my YouTube channel, America, Nation of the Goddess, the Venus families, the founding of the United States. This will lock into place a lot of the Hermetic principles, okay, as to why all this stuff matters. The ancient history is going to be a couple of books that I'm recommending. The Suppressed History of America by Paul Strag and Xavier Hayes. This goes into what a lot of the Mandean and Mandalorian analysis we're going to be doing on the channel and that we've done in the past, but it's a very short read. This can be done you can read this in a day. It gives the reader an expanded view on the ancient history of the past and how the knowledge of history is being blanketed over our eyes with quite a few steganography moments in there. And then, of course, America BC by Barry Fell, and Pirates of the Lost Templar Fleet by David Hetra Childress to show the disconnection point in the war where the Vatican and the Templars actually parted ways and what made way for a lot of this stuff. So 2 more books, just as the basic of the most basic of knowledge. The Alphabet That Changed the World by Stan Tenen will change your perspective on what the Hebrew language is as it relates to that metaphysical man image we're using. And it will awaken the harmonics of your mind in a way because it teaches about those harmony of the spheres concepts in the metaphysical form in the Hebrew language. And then Mara Beglino's newly English translated version of the book that will forever change our ideas about the Bible uses these metaphysical concepts of Hebrew to translate the actual text that's overlaid with the V to trick us and show us what the actual history of humanity is. So for that, there you have it. I mean, there's some geopolitical books. I guess the one that I do need to have everybody read for the times to come, the Bitcoin Standard, is actually, quite frankly, outside of the V-Steganography, just to prepare for the times to come. Read the Bitcoin Standard. In the economic woes that we're about to face as a humanity, you'll understand why, and you'll thank me for it. But anyway, I know the recommendation list is comprehensive. There are more of them I could have recommended that I didn't because I don't want to overload I don't want to give people 50 books to read.
Yeah, they have some reading for a while.
But yeah, that's what I was hoping for. People can have. I can reference this list now. People, because I keep getting it in the comment sections, I keep getting it in Patreon, and people are wanting to know what my perspectives are on this stuff, and so now they know. So we've got some chat before we transition out for the night. We got some chats. HP, I downloaded that one, put it in the TPE Telegram for all. Yep, okay. And then Zaralath is talking about ether and wood, also air metal. The Seth material. I've read them. HP is asking about the Seth books where there's a being that was channeled. I forgot the name of the author that channeled Seth. But HP, my answer about Seth is that you cannot necessarily trust these entities that manifest through channeling. They do exist, and I'm quite confident that Seth was channeled. Jane Roberts, that's right. Is Jane Roberts to blame for this? Probably not. But as I also understand it, allowing yourself to be the channel for another being that is not material in this life has massive repercussions on your karma for the next life. You're giving agency of your lambda over. It's like the ultimate expression of V in a certain sort of a way. And so even if this message that that Jane channeled was in fact something that needed to happen, part of her path in life. I don't know how to validate its basis in reality, because kind of in a similar way that Wetiko feeds on Loosh, I'm not convinced that the Seth entity was any different. You know, if that makes any sense. It's interesting to talk about though, because it's an actual effect. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that the whole Seth phenomenon is actual. It's as you can see, it's a debate that's ongoing with me, even with material like that, where I don't think about it too often, because otherwise I just get a headache, and it doesn't matter to me after a certain context because it's not provable. And so I move on and work on the stuff that I can actually, speak to a little bit better. But I do have the books. I've got, I think, 5 or 6 of the books. But anyway, yeah, there's my 2 cents on those. Thanks for the question. But anyway, that kind of wraps it up for the material that we hoped to cover tonight, guys. This gives you yet another kind of brief dive into the world of the V Cipher from a different perspective, bringing Allison into it. Remember, she's got her YouTube channel that you can subscribe to. We'll go back over there so I can, whoops. Maybe I didn't have the right browser up. Just a second. Sorry, everybody. I'll get her.
Kiatsugi.com.
Kiatsugi.com is her website.
That's the website.
And here's her.
Access my YouTube from there too.
Yeah, here's her YouTube. Allison Anchor on YouTube. And Kiatsugi.com are the websites that you can reach her. She'll start expanding her services on Kiatsugi.com once she has the ability to do so. But
yeah, and anyway. I just wanted to stress, even though I do spend a lot of my time working with teenaged youth, the concepts that I share and the things that I hope to educate people on is valuable at any age. So even though I am spending a lot of my time doing teen empowerment and mindfulness, it's something that we can all learn from. So yeah, check it out.
So yeah, that'll do it, guys. Follow me over on Theta.tv with Skullcap Savant. You can follow me on DLive. You can find me on Patreon and become part of the V Cipher community, where of course you get access to all the books we were referencing earlier. We got 1,200 documents that you can thumb through, and you can become part of the whole discussion. And then of course I've got my Discord server as well for collaborating and meeting other people in the community. But that's how you can engage with us. Theta is probably where I'm going to be more predominantly in the future, as everybody on the YouTube side is quickly learning. But I hope you like the experiment too. We'll hope to do a couple more of these where they're fleshed out collaboratively. This was thrown together in a manner of a couple of hours. I was going to do this alone, actually, until I figured to include her in this. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. HP says, thanks. The Nature of Reality is the last one. Then I like her own books. She writes, I don't want to channel, but I don't want to be lied to. It made sense through the content. Oh, she talking to the Seth material. I see. Well, cool. I mean, that's something we should probably have, as we were talking about earlier, some debates on to get to the bottom of, and it's a healthy thing to do. But we love y'all. We will see you all sometime very soon. I certainly will. I'll stream a couple times this week over to Patreon and YouTube. But until then, everybody have a good night and a safe election.
Yeah, safe election week here.
Bye-bye.